Hi and welcome to Roost Restorations. This video is part 2 of my attempt to revive a battered drop leaf table. If you haven't seen part 1, please check it out before continuing with this video. It may help you to make sense of things. In part 1, I took the table apart, then gave it a good clean and a woodworm treatment. I took the boards apart, jointed them and glued them back together. And during this process I discovered that the individual boards on the tabletop weren't even rectangular. I followed this up by sorting out the wheels. They were given a good clean and buffed up with some metal polish. After what seemed hours using a variety of sanders, I finished everything off with a hand sand. All that was left then was a lot of carpentry to start the rebuilding process. The majority of the screws had been pulled out of the hinges, and one of the leaves was completely detached. So I laboriously drilled out all the matchsticks that filled the holes and replaced them with oak plugs. After consulting an old textbook, I was convinced that the hinges were seated too deeply into the leaves, and that this was causing the damage to the shoulders. So, after painstakingly plugging all the holes, I decided to fill the hinge mortices and start over again. Using scrap pieces of oak recovered from previous projects, I set about filling all 14 hinge mortices. 12 from the hinges, and the extra 2 where the original maker mistakenly placed them more than a century ago. After letting the glue set, I cut all the patches to rough length and then planed and sanded them flush. table leaves were quite warped and had pine braces on the back to hold them as flat as possible. I decided to replace them with more substantial oak ones. Because the table leaves expand and contract with changes in humidity, I made the holes for the screws into slots on the end of each brace. This meant that the boards weren't restricted from moving by the screws, so long as they weren't in too tight. The next job was to trim and sand the repairs to the shoulders of the tabletop that I made in part 1. I had intended to use a dark oak stain on the tabletop, but as I started to colour the repairs, I realised that it was going to look too dark, so a rapid change of mind was about to happen. Because the underside of the table and leaves was such a patchwork of colours, I decided to stain it black, like the legs, to hide all the obvious repairs. Moving back to the legs, I gave them a coat of Gilboy's wax oil, and once that was dry, I applied some Gilboy's wax.
I'd like to introduce my two helpers for today.
I like and subscribe.
The only reason for mentioning Gilboy's wax is to keep like and subscribe happy, as they now wander around the house doing impressions of me saying it. Having done a U-turn on staining the top, I decided to give it another treatment with oxalic acid to clean up a few more of the stains. With all the repairs done, I used a small palm router to cut much smaller mortices, ready for reinstalling the hinges. I finished the top off with 2 coats of wax oil with a rub down with fine grit sandpaper in between.